After nearly 5 months on the run,
this afternoon here on Honeysuckle Lane, the United States Marshals Southeast Fugitive Task Force, in conjunction with the Atlanta Police Department and the Clayton County Police Department, were able to take Derrick Groves, 28 years old, into custody.
Derrick Groves is once again in custody. Police say he was taken into custody peacefully, but he left reporters on the scene with a kiss, then an unclear message screaming something including, "They're taking me."
Derrick Groves was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the neighborhood known as the Lower Ninth Ward. This area, historically marginalized and economically disadvantaged, had long been plagued by poverty, limited educational opportunities, and high rates of crime. For families like the Groves, daily life often meant navigating these harsh realities while trying to survive amid systemic neglect and neighborhood violence. Groves' childhood was marked by instability. Details about his family life indicate that he grew up in a household where supervision was limited and economic hardship was constant. Like many youths in the Lower Ninth Ward, he was exposed early to the street life, a world where respect, power, and money could be gained quickly, but at great risk. Children in this environment often found themselves drawn into minor offenses at an early age, and Groves was no exception. By the time he reached adolescence, he had already had several run-ins with local law enforcement for petty theft and truancy. The schools in the Lower Ninth Ward struggled with overcrowding, underfunding, and a lack of resources. Groves attended local schools, but reportedly began skipping classes in middle school, drawn more to the streets than the classroom. By the 9th grade, he dropped out entirely, leaving him with few legitimate avenues to support himself. Without the structure of school or strong community programs to engage youth, Groves turned increasingly to the local drug trade. The Lower Ninth Ward had long been a hub for narcotics distribution, particularly heroin, which was highly prevalent in the area. Derrick Groves, still a teenager, began associating with older street figures who operated the local drug trade. He quickly learned the rules of this underground economy, loyalty to one's crew, the importance of reputation, and the use of violence to enforce control and resolve disputes. By the time he was 17 or 18, Groves was already involved in selling heroin on the streets, building connections that would later become central to his criminal identity. Neighbors recall seeing Groves with groups of older teens, often congregating on street corners or in abandoned lots, where drugs were exchanged and disputes over territory or sales were settled with intimidation or violence. While some youths were able to avoid deeper entanglement with the law, Groves' combination of ambition, street smarts, and willingness to use force set him on a trajectory that would catch the attention of law enforcement. Despite his criminal inclinations, Groves' early years were not without moments of normalcy. Family and friends describe him as charismatic and quick-witted, able to charm adults and peers alike. These traits helped him navigate the complexities of the streets, where alliances and perception often determined survival. They also masked the growing volatility in his behavior, of volatility that would later erupt in violent crimes with tragic consequences. By the time he reached adulthood, Derrick Groves had become a known figure in the Lower Ninth Ward, both feared and respected within certain circles. His early experiences in a community marked by economic deprivation, systemic neglect, and street violence created the foundation for the life choices he would make, a life that would ultimately lead him down a path of murder, incarceration, and infamy. By the time Derrick Groves reached his mid-teens, the streets of New Orleans' Lower Ninth Ward had become more than just his environments. They had become his classroom. In a neighborhood where economic opportunity was scarce and criminal enterprise offered fast money and social standing, Groves was drawn deeper into the local drug trade. Dropping out of school in the 9th grade left Groves with few legitimate paths to success. He gravitated toward older street figures who could provide him with guidance, or, more accurately. For more videos like this, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Indoctrination into the world of narcotics. The drug trade, particularly heroin, was thriving in the Lower Ninth Ward, and young men like Groves were often seen as ideal recruits, energetic, fearless, and able to navigate both the streets and the neighborhood's complex social dynamics. Initially, Groves' role was limited to small-scale activities. He delivered drugs for more experienced dealers, learned how to conceal transactions, and was trained to identify law enforcement surveillance. These early tasks allowed him to prove his reliability while familiarizing him with the unwritten rules of street life. Failure to comply or missteps could lead to violent consequences, and Groves quickly learned the high stakes involved. As Groves' reputation grew, so did his involvement. He began handling larger quantities of heroin, establishing his own distribution network within the neighborhood. The profits were significant compared to legal employment opportunities in the lower Ninth Ward, and the combination of wealth and street credibility reinforced his commitment to this illicit lifestyle. Law enforcement had been monitoring Groves since his early teens. Arrests for minor theft and drug possession marked his juvenile record, but as he transitioned into adulthood, the offenses became more serious. Surveillance indicated that Groves was becoming increasingly brazen in his operations. Officers reported seeing him armed in public, often carrying firearms to protect himself and his business interests. These were not occasional weapons. He maintained access to assault rifles and handguns, which reflected the violent nature of the drug conflicts in his neighborhood. Despite his criminal trajectory, Groves maintained a complex persona. Friends and family described him as charismatic, confident, and surprisingly strategic. He cultivated relationships carefully, balancing loyalty to certain allies while avoiding conflicts with more powerful figures in the local drug trade. His social media presence also revealed a dual life. On one hand, he flaunted wealth, status, and bravado. On the other, he left digital traces of threats, alliances, and conflicts that would later serve as critical evidence in court. By the age of 18, Groves had established himself as a significant player in the lower Ninth Ward heroin market. He had earned both respect and fear, a combination that made him a target for rivals and law enforcement alike. The escalation of his criminal activities set the stage for the violent confrontations that would follow, culminating in the 2018 Mardi Gras Day shooting that shocked the community and put Groves at the center of a high-profile murder case. In retrospect, those early years of drug dealing were formative. They honed his understanding of street strategy, the mechanics of the narcotics business, and the importance of power and reputation. They also hardened him to violence, creating patterns of behavior that would have deadly consequences in the years to come. Groves' entrance into the drug trade was not simply a matter of circumstance. It was a deliberate choice shaped by environment, ambition, and the harsh realities of life in one of New Orleans' most challenging neighborhoods. By the late 2010s, Derrick Groves had firmly established himself as a significant presence in the lower Ninth Ward's heroin market. His rapid rise, however, came with inevitable consequences. Rivalries. In the tightly contested drug trade of New Orleans, territory and reputation were everything, and even minor slights could escalate into violence. Groves' growing influence put him on a collision course with other crews who had long-standing claims in the area. The conflicts were not sudden. They developed over months of territorial disputes, stolen shipments, and challenges to authority. Groves' competitors began targeting his operations, sometimes through intimidation and occasionally with outright acts of violence. Groves responded in kind, using both physical threats and his arsenal of firearms to protect his business and assert dominance. Social media became an unexpected stage for these rivalries. Groves, like many of his peers, used platforms to display wealth, weapons, and loyalty to his crew. Posts and videos often contained sometimes blatant toward rivals. Investigators would later note that these digital footprints were critical in understanding the motivations behind violent incidents, including the eventual Mardi Gras shooting. The posts served not only as a warning, but also as a documentation of alliances, feuds, and his readiness to defend his territory. Eyewitness accounts from the lower Ninth Ward indicated that tension in the community had reached a boiling point by early 2018. Local residents described a sense of unease. Disputes among crews were spilling into public spaces, and gunfire had become a near-regular occurrence. Groves' own reputation for retaliation made him both feared and respected. Those who crossed him more were suspected of doing so faced serious consequences. law enforcement was acutely aware of the escalating tensions. Prior to the Mardi Gras shooting, officers had noted several incidents of targeted attacks, drive-by shootings, and threats between rival groups. Groves' name appeared frequently in police reports, often connected to armed confrontations, narcotics trafficking, and neighborhood intimidation. Yet, despite multiple arrests for minor offenses, a major violent crime had not yet been linked to him, at least, not in a way that could secure a conviction. These months of rising tension set the stage for what would become one of the most notorious violent acts in the lower Ninth Ward in recent memory. The combination of Groves' increasing power, the ongoing feuds, and his willingness to use lethal force created a volatile environment. Residents later recounted the pervasive sense of dread in the community. Mardi Gras, a time meant for celebration, became a backdrop for the culmination of these rivalries. It was against this backdrop of escalating threats, social media taunts, and neighborhood fear that the events of February 13, 2018 would unfold. A day when a block party meant to celebrate culture and community would instead become the scene of deadly violence. The 2018 Mardi Gras Day shooting. February 13, 2018, began like any other Mardi Gras day in New Orleans. Streets were lined with colorful decorations, music filled the air, and crowds of residents and tourists celebrated the city's most famous festival. In the lower Ninth Ward, a neighborhood with a rich cultural heritage but a history of economic hardship and crime, block parties were a staple of the celebration, a time to gather, enjoy music, and share food with neighbors. But that day, what should have been a joyful celebration would descend into chaos and tragedy. Derrick Groves, already a known figure in the neighborhood's criminal underworld, arrived at one such block party armed with an assault rifle. Eyewitnesses later described seeing Groves and at least one accomplice arrive in a vehicle, weaving through the crowd with a purpose that immediately unsettled onlookers. The first shots rang out suddenly, cutting through the music and laughter. Panic erupted as partygoers screamed and scrambled for cover. Children were pulled into homes and vehicles. Adults shielded one another, and the once celebratory streets quickly became a scene of terror. Mardi, Robinson, and Byron Jackson were fatally shot. Both were bystanders, caught in the crossfire of a dispute that had been brewing in the shadows of the lower Ninth Ward's drug trade. 2 additional individuals were injured, their lives forever altered by the randomness of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The attack was reportedly a targeted strike against rival drug dealers, but the indiscriminate nature of the shooting made it clear that anyone present could be a victim. Witnesses recalled the chaos vividly. One local resident described seeing Groves raise his rifle and fire into the crowd, moving with calculated precision as if he were executing a plan rather than reacting spontaneously. Others reported hearing him shout threats, asserting dominance over his rivals and warning the neighborhood that he would not be challenged. Immediate law enforcement response. Within minutes, law enforcement officers were on the scene. Emergency calls flooded the 911 dispatch, reporting multiple victims and an active shooter. Police vehicles converged on the lower Ninth Ward, sirens blaring, while officers attempted to locate Groves and his accomplice amid panicked crowds. Medics attended to the wounded, and the streets, once filled with music, were now littered with overturned chairs, broken decorations, and the remnants of a community celebration shattered by violence. Investigation and digital evidence. Investigators quickly linked the attack to Derrick Groves, who had become a person of interest due to his known involvement in neighborhood rivalries and previous criminal activity. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and forensic evidence, including shell casings, established his presence at the scene. Social media posts by Groves further corroborated his involvement. Videos and images showed him brandishing weapons and issuing veiled threats toward his rivals in the weeks leading up to the shooting. The community impact. For residents of the lower Ninth Ward, the Mardi Gras shooting was a traumatic event that reverberated through the community. Families mourned the deaths of Jamar Robinson and Byron Jackson, while those injured faced long recoveries and ongoing physical and emotional scars. Local leaders expressed frustration at the persistent violence and called for increased police presence and community programs to prevent future tragedies. The shooting also sparked a broader discussion about the intersection of street violence, social media, and public events. Many questioned how Groves, a known criminal with a history of drug dealing and firearm possession, could carry out such an attack in a public setting without immediate intervention. Groves was arrested and initially convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. However, these convictions were vacated on appeal in 2021, and the case was remanded for further proceedings. It was not until October 2024, after a 4th trial, that Groves was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Mardi Gras Day shooting became a defining moment in Groves' criminal history. It marked the transition from street-level drug conflicts to acts of deadly violence that impacted innocent community members. The incident remained etched in the memories of residents, law enforcement, and the families of victims, an indelible reminder of how quickly celebration could turn into tragedy when violence intersects with personal vendettas. The initial arrest and trials. Following the chaos of the Mardi Gras Day shooting, law enforcement quickly identified Derrick Groves as the primary suspect. His known involvement in the neighborhood drug trade, coupled with eyewitness accounts and digital evidence, made him the focus of an intensive investigation. Groves was arrested within days of the attack, ending his brief period of freedom after committing one of the most violent acts in the lower 9th Ward in recent memory. Groves' arrest was executed quietly, but with careful planning. Police officers apprehended him at a residence in the lower 9th Ward, ensuring that the operation avoided endangering nearby residents. He was immediately charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, corresponding to the deaths of Jamar Robinson and Byron Jackson, as well as 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder for the injuries inflicted on 2 others. Additional charges related to illegal possession of firearms and drug activity were also filed, reflecting his broader criminal profile. Upon arrest, Groves was booked into the Orleans Parish Justice Center. Reports described him as calm and composed, a demeanor that reflected both confidence and a sense of inevitability regarding the legal process. While some expected him to resist or express remorse, Groves maintained a guarded silence, offering few statements to authorities outside of his legal representation. The pretrial phase was complex. Groves' defense team argued that witness accounts were unreliable, claiming that panic during the block party may have led to misidentification. They also questioned the handling of forensic evidence, particularly the shell casings and ballistic reports, suggesting potential procedural errors. The defense sought to challenge the use of social media posts as incriminating evidence, contending that online content could be misinterpreted and was not direct proof of involvement in the shooting. Prosecutors, however, presented a meticulous case. They argued that Groves' online activity demonstrated both motive and premeditation, highlighting videos and posts where he displayed weapons and made references to rival crews. Eyewitness testimonies placed Groves at the scene, corroborated by surveillance footage showing him in proximity to the shooting. Investigators also emphasized his history of violent behavior and possession of firearms, portraying him as a calculated and dangerous individual. Initial trial and conviction. Groves' first trial concluded with a conviction on all counts. He was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. The verdict reflected the jury's belief in the weight of combined evidence, witness testimony, physical evidence, and digital records. At the time, the conviction seemed to mark the end of Groves' violent trajectory, and sentencing appeared imminent. Appeals and vacated convictions. The legal battle was far from over. In 2021, Groves' convictions were vacated on appeal. The appellate court identified procedural errors in the handling of the case, particularly regarding the admissibility of certain pieces of evidence and jury instruction. The ruling highlighted the complexities of the legal system, demonstrating that even high-profile cases require strict adherence to procedural safeguards to ensure a fair trial. The vacating of the convictions reignited community tension. Families of victims expressed frustration and fear, worrying that Groves could evade justice. Law enforcement and prosecutors prepared for gathering additional evidence and refining their approach to ensure that Groves would face consequences commensurate with the gravity of his crimes. Over the next several years, Groves faced multiple retrials. Each trial examined the same underlying events, but with refinements to evidence presentation, and courtroom strategy. Prosecutors emphasized Groves' digital footprint, eyewitness consistency, and his calculated behavior leading up to and following the Mardi Gras shooting. Defense attorneys continued to challenge the reliability of witness statements and the interpretation of online activity. Ultimately, after 4 trials, Groves was reconvicted in October 2024. The prosecution's persistence, combined with overwhelming evidence, resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The final conviction closed the chapter of legal uncertainty and provided some measure of closure for the families affected by the shooting. Final conviction and sentencing. By the time Derrick Groves returned to court in 2024 for his 4th trial, the weight of his criminal record and prior convictions loomed large. This trial would determine not only his fate, but also provide a sense of closure for the families of Yamar Robinson and Byron Jackson, whose lives had been tragically cut short during the 2018 Mardi Gras Day shooting. The 4th trial, courtroom dynamics. The courtroom was tense on the first day of the trial. Prosecutors, armed with a decade's worth of evidence, outlined Groves' criminal trajectory, emphasizing his involvement in the drug trade, his previous violent behavior, and the premeditated nature of the shooting. Witnesses were prepared to recount the chaos of that day, including first-hand observations of Groves opening fire in a crowded block party. Social media evidence played a crucial role. Prosecutors presented videos and posts showing Groves displaying firearms and making veiled threats toward rival crews. These pieces of evidence were framed as indicators of motive and intent, underscoring that the shooting was not a spontaneous act but a calculated response to ongoing rivalries. Defense attorneys challenged the admissibility of certain evidence, arguing that posts could be misinterpreted and did not constitute proof of direct involvement in the shooting. They attempted to cast doubt on the consistency of eyewitness testimonies, pointing to the chaotic nature of the block party as a factor that might have affected memory and perception. The trial also drew significant public attention. Media coverage highlighted the gravity of the case, with residents of the lower Ninth Ward and the broader New Orleans community closely following developments. For many, the trial represented a litmus test of the city's justice system. Could it effectively hold a known violent criminal accountable while adhering to legal standards? Verdict and conviction. After several weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Derrick Groves was convicted on all counts, 2 charges of second-degree murder and 2 charges of attempted second-degree murder. The decision reflected the overwhelming evidence against him and the consistency of witness accounts. The jury's decision was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Families of the victims expressed gratitude that justice had finally been served, but lamented the long, drawn-out legal process that had delayed closure. Community leaders praised the outcome, emphasizing that it demonstrated the importance of persistence and diligence in the pursuit of justice. Sentencing hearing. The sentencing hearing was a solemn affair. Prosecutors delivered powerful statements highlighting the senselessness of the violence and the devastating impact on the victims' families. They portrayed Groves as a man who had chosen a path of violence and criminality despite numerous opportunities to avoid such outcomes. Defense attorneys attempted to humanize Groves, emphasizing his troubled upbringing, the socioeconomic challenges of the lower Ninth Ward, and the potential for rehabilitation. They argued for a sentence that might allow for eventual parole, citing his age at the time of the crimes and the influence of environmental factors on his choices. The judge delivered the sentence with measured gravity. Derrick Groves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, reflecting the court's determination that his actions warranted the maximum penalty under Louisiana law. The judge noted the premeditated nature of the crimes, the extreme danger posed to the public, and the profound impact on the victims' families. Community reaction. The reaction in the lower Ninth Ward was complex. Many residents felt a sense of relief that Groves would no longer pose a threat, while others expressed sadness that the community had been forced to endure such a violent act in the first place. Local advocacy groups called for increased investment in youth programs, education, and community policing to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Families of the victims spoke publicly about their sense of closure, but also about the enduring pain caused by the loss of loved ones. For them, the trial and sentencing were steps toward healing, though the memory of that chaotic Mardi Gras day would never fade. Aftermath. The final conviction of Derrick Gras marked a significant milestone in New Orleans' ongoing struggle with street violence and gang-related conflicts. It also underscored the role of perseverance in the justice system, demonstrating that repeated trials, appeals, and legal challenges can eventually lead to accountability even in complex and high-profile cases. For Gras, the sentence represented the culmination of a criminal trajectory that began in his youth, escalated through drug dealing and violent confrontations, and ultimately ended with a life behind bars. For the community and the families of his victims, it was a moment of reckoning, a reminder of both the cost of violence and the potential for justice. Even after years of uncertainty, jail life, and planning the escape. After his final conviction in October 2024, Derrick Gras was transferred to the Orleans Parish Justice Center, one of the most secure detention facilities in New Orleans. Although the facility was designed to house dangerous inmates and prevent escapes, Gras' reputation and resourcefulness quickly made him a figure of attention among both inmates and staff. Life in the Justice Center was regimented and harsh. Inmates were confined to their cells for long periods, subjected to strict schedules for meals, recreation, and work assignments. Security cameras monitored movement, and guards conducted frequent checks. Despite these measures, Gras adapted quickly to the routines of prison life, using his intelligence and social skills to navigate interactions with other inmates and even some staff members. He became known for his charisma and ability to influence others. Fellow inmates often described him as strategic, calculating, and fearless, someone who could command attention without overt aggression. He maintained a careful balance, forming alliances with powerful inmates while avoiding unnecessary conflicts that could jeopardize his position or create targets on his back. While outwardly conforming to prison rules, Gras began to formulate a plan to escape. Observant and patient, he studied the facility's layout, the timing of guard shifts, and the behavior of correctional officers. He noted weaknesses in security, such as areas with limited surveillance or routines that could be exploited. Investigators later determined that Gras and other inmates identified a structural vulnerability, a hole behind a toilet in one of the cell blocks. The opening led to areas outside the secured wing, offering a potential path to freedom. However, executing such a plan required careful coordination, tools, and inside knowledge, none of which could be obtained. Gras' girlfriend, a former jail employee, was allegedly instrumental in facilitating the escape. She reportedly provided him with information about guard schedules, potential blind spots, and methods to exploit weaknesses in the facility's infrastructure. Additionally, she may have helped acquire materials or tools needed to enlarge the hole and make it passable. Authorities later revealed that several other inmates were involved in planning the escape, creating a network of coordination and trust. Each participant had a specific role, from timing movements to managing distractions, all designed to maximize the chance of success while minimizing detection. Planning the escape was not purely physical. It required mental discipline and patience. Gras maintained a calm exterior, avoiding drawing attention from staff while quietly coordinating with others. He also prepared for the uncertainty that awaited him outside the jail, where he would have to navigate unfamiliar territory, evade law enforcement, and survive without the relative safety of prison routines. The psychological stakes were high. Any misstep could result in solitary confinement, additional charges, or even death if caught during the attempt. Yet, Gras' previous experience in higher-risk situations on the streets had given him a tolerance for danger and a capacity to act under pressure. By May 2025, the plan was nearly ready to execute. Tools were acquired, alliances confirmed, and contingencies considered. Gras and the other inmates had carefully calculated the timing, knowing that the opportunity would only present itself briefly. The combination of careful observation, insider assistance, and meticulous planning set the stage for one of the most audacious jailbreaks in New Orleans' recent history, breakout that would capture national attention. The 2025 jailbreak. May 16, 2025, began like any other day inside the Orleans Parish Justice Center. Inmates followed the routine of breakfast, cell checks, and work assignments, while guards maintained regular patrols. But for Derrick Groves and 9 other inmates, this day would mark one of the most daring escapes in recent memory. Breakout that exposed vulnerabilities in one of New Orleans' most secure detention facilities. Groves and his co-conspirators had identified a small but crucial flaw, a hole behind a toilet in one of the cell blocks. This opening led to areas outside the secured wing, providing a potential pathway to freedom. At a coordinated time, Groves and the other inmates moved quickly. Using improvised tools, they accessed the hole and climbed through, one by one. Inside, observers later described the escape as audacious and meticulous testament to Groves' leadership and strategic thinking. When the breakout was discovered, chaos erupted within the jail. Guards scrambled to account for missing inmates. Alarms sounded, and communication with police outside the facility was initiated. Within minutes, it became clear that 10 inmates, including Groves, were at large. The incident stunned both the public and law enforcement, raising immediate concerns about jail security and the potential threat posed by these dangerous fugitives. Inside the facility, reports described confusion and panic. Officers conducted head counts and reviewed surveillance footage, realizing that the escape had been aided by insider knowledge. The notion that a former jail girlfriend may have provided assistance only intensified scrutiny of the facility's procedures and staff vetting processes. Once the escape was confirmed, authorities launched a large-scale manhunt. Local law enforcement, federal agencies, and surrounding jurisdictions were alerted. The escapees were considered armed and extremely dangerous, with Groves, in particular, noted for his involvement in violent crimes, including the 2018 Mardi Gras Day shooting. Officers canvassed neighborhoods, checked transportation hubs, and issued public alerts. Tips from the community played a critical role in tracking movements, as authorities sought to intercept the fugitives before they could leave the area. Social media and local news outlets amplified awareness, warning residents to remain vigilant and report suspicious activity. Investigators later uncovered evidence suggesting that Groves may have received assistance from contacts outside the facility. Communications between inmates and allies hinted at prearranged safe houses, transportation plans, and support networks that would aid their evasion. Groves' prior experience in navigating the streets of the lower Ninth Ward gave him a tactical advantage, allowing him to blend into familiar neighborhoods and avoid immediate detection, public reaction, and security concerns. The jailbreak generated widespread public concern and media attention. Families of residents in New Orleans feared for their safety, while officials faced intense scrutiny over the apparent lapses in security that enabled the escape. The incident prompted internal reviews at the Justice Center, revealing systemic weaknesses and leading to personnel investigations, including the former employee implicated in assisting Groves. The escape was more than a simple act of breaking free. It was a stark demonstration of how preparation, knowledge of the system, and strategic alliances could exploit even highly secure environments. For Groves, it marked the beginning of nearly 5 months on the run-up period that would test his survival skills, resourcefulness, and ability to remain undetected while law enforcement intensified their pursuit. After the audacious jailbreak of May 16, 2025, Derrick Groves vanished into the urban landscape of New Orleans and beyond, initiating a nearly 5-month period during which he remained one of the most wanted fugitives in the country, with law enforcement agencies coordinating across city, state, and federal levels. Groves' ability to evade capture demonstrated both his street savvy and careful planning. Immediate evasion. In the hours following the escape, Groves and his fellow fugitives dispersed, each heading to predetermined, safe locations. Groves reportedly returned to areas he knew intimately, the lower Ninth Ward streets where he had grown up, learned the drug trade, and navigated complex social networks. These familiar neighborhoods provided him with cover, allowing him to blend in with residents and avoid early detection. Authorities were initially hampered by the chaotic environment surrounding the escape. The block-by-block search of New Orleans' dense urban areas, combined with limited resources and a lack of precise intelligence on Groves' whereabouts allowed him to slip through the first critical days of the manhunt. Surveillance footage and witness reports suggested he was cautious, moving primarily at night and avoiding locations that were heavily monitored. Groves was not entirely alone. Investigators later determined that he had access to a support network that included friends, family members, and associates from his drug trade connections. These contacts provided him with food, shelter, and information about law enforcement movements. In some instances, vehicles were provided for temporary transportation, though Groves reportedly avoided long-distance travel early on to minimize the risk of encountering checkpoints or police patrols. The existence of this support network complicated efforts to capture him. Law enforcement had to carefully trace communications, analyze financial transactions, and interview community members to identify anyone assisting the fugitive. Each lead required verification, as the risk of false tips or deliberate misinformation was high. Groves demonstrated considerable resourcefulness during his time on the run. Observers noted that he adopted a low profile, occasionally changing clothing and appearance to reduce the likelihood of recognition. His prior experience in navigating dangerous environments, gained during years in the drug trade, proved invaluable. Groves understood how to move quietly, remain inconspicuous, and anticipate patterns of police behavior, which allowed him to evade capture even when officers conducted door-to-door searches. Authorities mounted an extensive, multi-agency manhunt. Officers conducted sweeps of known hangouts, monitored tips from residents, and deployed specialized units trained in fugitive apprehension. Federal agencies, including the FBI, were involved in tracking digital footprints, financial activity, and potential interstate travel. Despite these efforts, Groves remained elusive. Police sources indicated that he rarely stayed in one place for long, often moving under cover of darkness and utilizing contacts to avoid capture. Each time law enforcement closed in, Groves reportedly altered his route, demonstrating tactical thinking reminiscent of his previous criminal strategies. The months-long manhunt created tension and fear in neighborhoods where Groves was suspected to be hiding. Residents expressed concern over his presence, particularly given his history of violent crime. Local leaders urged cooperation with authorities, while cautioning against taking matters into their own hands. Meanwhile, the media closely covered the pursuit, emphasizing both Groves' dangerous profile and the challenges law enforcement faced in apprehending him. As summer approached, tips continued to trickle in, yet Groves' intimate knowledge of the city, combined with careful planning, kept him one step ahead. Each day on the run heightened both the public's fascination and anxiety, setting the stage for what would ultimately become a tense and dramatic capture months later in Atlanta. After nearly 5 months on the run, Derrick Groves' freedom came to an abrupt end in southwest Atlanta in October 2025. The culmination of an intense multi-agency manhunt brought law enforcement face-to-face with a fugitive who had managed to elude capture for nearly half a year. Leveraging his street knowledge, survival skills, and local support networks, tracking Groves to Atlanta, the breakthrough came through a combination of digital forensics, tips from the public, and traditional investigative work. Authorities monitored cell phone activity, financial transactions, and travel patterns, gradually narrowing down Groves' location. Surveillance footage from local businesses, along with community tips, suggested that he had left New Orleans and was attempting to lay low in the Atlanta area, possibly relying on relatives or contacts from previous criminal activity. Law enforcement coordinated across multiple agencies, including the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and local Atlanta police. Given Groves' history of violent crime, including the 2018 Mardi Gras Day shooting, authorities approached the operation with extreme caution. Tactical units, equipped for high-risk arrests, were deployed. The planning phase included detailed assessment of potential threats, including the possibility of armed resistance, barricades, or accomplices attempting to facilitate escape. Investigators were keenly aware that Groves had survived in hostile environments before. His ability to evade law enforcement for months indicated a propensity for strategic thinking and calculated risk-taking. Every precaution was taken to ensure a controlled and safe capture. and tactical units positioned themselves around all possible exit points. According to law enforcement reports, Groves initially attempted to hide, but officers successfully cornered him without incident. The arrest was swift and controlled. Groves was taken into custody without any shots fired, a testament to the careful coordination of the operation. Officers reported that he was compliant once confronted, understanding the futility of further resistance after months of running. The capture of Derrick Groves was met with relief and attention from both law enforcement and the public. Police praised the collaborative effort that led to the arrest, emphasizing the importance of multi-agency coordination in tracking fugitives who cross state lines. The Atlanta Police Department issued a statement noting that Groves was considered extremely dangerous, highlighting his violent history and the significance of his recapture. Residents in Southwest Atlanta expressed a mix of shock and relief. Many were unaware that a notorious fugitive was hiding in their community until news of the arrest spread. Local media covered the story extensively, framing it as the dramatic conclusion to a months-long manhunt that had captured national attention. Authorities debriefed extensively following the arrest, reviewing every aspect of the operation to identify lessons learned and improve future fugitive apprehensions. They also continued investigations into any individuals who may have aided Groves while on the run, including contacts in both New Orleans and Atlanta. The capture marked the end of Groves' brief but intense period of freedom. It brought closure to a case that had alarmed to communities, reaffirmed the effectiveness of coordinated law enforcement strategies, and set the stage for further legal consequences stemming from his escape and ongoing criminal charges. The arrest of Derrick Groves in Atlanta in October 2025 was only the beginning of a new chapter in his legal battles. While his prior convictions for the 2018 Mardi Gras Day shooting had already sentenced him to life without parole, the audacity of his jailbreak and months on the run introduced a fresh set of legal consequences. Immediately following his recapture, Groves faced a series of additional charges tied to the escape. Prosecutors in Louisiana filed multiple counts, including conspiracy to commit escape, recognizing that Groves had coordinated with other inmates and possibly outside contacts to facilitate the breakout. Escape from custody, directly related to the May 16, 2025 jailbreak. Accessory and aiding charges for individuals who had allegedly assisted him in planning or executing the escape, including his former girlfriend and other accomplices. These charges reflected both the severity of the act and its broader implications. Escaping from a high-security facility was considered a major offense under Louisiana law, particularly given Groves' violent criminal history. Authorities conducted parallel investigations into potential accomplices. Law enforcement identified and arrested several individuals, including former jail employee, Groves' girlfriend, who allegedly provided insider knowledge regarding guard shifts, facility vulnerabilities, and tools to aid in the breakout. Other inmates, several co-conspirators who had directly participated in planning or executing the escape. Outside contacts, individuals who were suspected of providing temporary shelter, vehicles, or communication support while Groves was on the run. Each arrest triggered separate investigations and court proceedings. Prosecutors aimed to ensure that all parties involved were held accountable, sending a clear message about the consequences of aiding in escapes. Groves' post-escape court proceedings began with arraignment, where he was formally charged with the new offenses. Due to the high-profile nature of the case, proceedings were closely monitored by the media and law enforcement agencies. Defense attorneys argued that the additional charges were redundant, emphasizing that Groves was already serving a life sentence without parole and suggesting that further prosecution was unnecessary. Prosecutors countered, asserting that the escape was a serious crime with national implications, and that accountability for both Groves and his accomplices was essential to maintaining public safety and institutional integrity. Evidence presented in court included surveillance footage from the Justice Center showing movement and activity related to the escape, testimonies from other inmates and staff who observed or assisted in planning the breakout, digital communications indicating coordination between Groves and outside contacts, physical evidence, including tools and contraband used to facilitate the escape. Following trial and deliberation, Derrick Groves was convicted on all counts related to the escape. Given his existing life sentence, the new charges did not extend his time behind bars in a practical sense, but they did reinforce his dangerous profile and ensured that any leniency was impossible. Accomplices received varied sentences depending on their level of involvement. The former jail employee faced significant prison time for aiding and abetting the escape, while other inmates received additional years to be served consecutively with prior sentences. Law enforcement emphasized that these convictions were necessary to uphold institutional security and deter future escape attempts. The legal aftermath of Groves' escape had far-reaching consequences. The Orleans Parish Justice Center undertook extensive reviews of security protocols, resulting in changes to staff vetting, surveillance systems, and emergency response procedures. The case also drew national attention, highlighting the vulnerabilities of detention facilities and the lengths to which a determined and resourceful inmate could go to evade custody. For Derrick Groves, the post-escape legal proceedings cemented his legacy as a dangerous, calculating criminal whose actions continued to impact the justice system long after the original crimes. For the community and law enforcement, it served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the persistent risks posed by violent offenders and the necessity of vigilance, coordination, and accountability. The saga of Derrick Groves, from his early life in New Orleans' lower Ninth Ward to his violent crimes, audacious jailbreak, months on the run, and eventual recapture, left an indelible mark on multiple communities. The ripple effects of his actions extended beyond law enforcement and courts, affecting families, neighborhoods, and public perceptions of safety and justice. For residents of the lower Ninth Ward, Groves' criminal trajectory reinforced long-standing fears about the dangers posed by street violence. The 2018 Mardi Gras Day shooting, which claimed the lives of Jamar Robinson and Byron Jackson, had already traumatized the community. When Groves escaped from prison in 2025, the tension and anxiety resurfaced, this time on a broader scale. Families worried that he might return to familiar neighborhoods, and parents feared for the safety of their children. Community leaders and activists emphasized the need for systemic solutions to curb violence. They called for increased youth engagement programs to provide alternatives to gang and drug activity, greater investment in educational resources and after-school activities, stronger partnerships between law enforcement and community organizations to prevent escalation of street-level conflicts. Many residents saw Groves' story as a cautionary tale, illustrating how environmental factors, economic hardship, and systemic neglect can contribute to a life of crime if early intervention is absent. The families of Jamar Robinson and Byron Jackson endured years of grief compounded by Groves' escape. Each court appearance, trial, and media report reopened wounds and reminded them of the senseless loss of life. Following Groves' final conviction and recapture, families expressed a complex mix of relief, sorrow, and frustration. Relief that justice had been ultimately served and that Groves would no longer pose a threat to anyone else. Sorrow, the enduring emotional toll of losing loved ones to violent crime, compounded by years of legal uncertainty. Frustration at the drawn-out judicial process, including multiple trials, appeals, and the jail escape, which extended their suffering. Statements from the families often highlighted the human cost of Groves' actions and emphasized the importance of community support, counseling, and advocacy for victims of violent crime. The 2025 jailbreak revealed critical vulnerabilities in the Orleans Parish Justice Center. Officials conducted thorough internal reviews, leading to strengthened security protocols, including enhanced surveillance and structural assessments, more rigorous staff, vetting, and monitoring procedures to prevent insider involvement in criminal activity, improved emergency response and coordination with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. The incident also became a case study for correctional facilities nationwide, illustrating how careful planning, insider assistance, and inmate coordination can exploit even secure environments. Groves' criminal legacy. Derrick Groves' criminal career spanned decades, encompassing street-level drug trade, violent murder, a high-profile jailbreak, and evasion of law enforcement. His actions created lasting trauma for victims, families, and the communities affected by his crimes. Infamy. Groves became widely known as a dangerous and resourceful criminal whose audacity challenged law enforcement. Cautionary example: his life illustrates how environmental pressures, poor community resources, and exposure to crime at an early age can contribute to escalating violence. Law enforcement lessons: the case prompted improvements in investigative techniques, interagency, cooperation, and correctional facility security practices. While Groves' life behind bars is now permanent, his story serves as both a warning and a lesson. It underscores the consequences of criminal choices, the importance of community support systems, and the ongoing challenges that law enforcement and society face when addressing violent offenders. Derrick Groves' life and crimes are emblematic of the intersection of environment, personal choices, and systemic failures. From the streets of the lower Ninth Ward to courtrooms and prison facilities, his actions affected countless lives. The victims' families continue to grieve, communities remain vigilant, and law enforcement agencies have been forced to adapt. Though Groves' era of freedom ended with his recapture, the impact of his violence and audacity continues to resonate. His story is a stark reminder that true crime does not exist in isolation. It intertwines with the lives of families, neighbors, and entire communities, leaving lessons that extend far beyond headlines. What true crime case has stuck with you or kept you up at night? Let us know in the comments. Your suggestion might be featured in an upcoming episode.